Adam Robinson spent nearly a decade on Wall Street as a credit trader before completely overturning his life at the age of 30 to become a tech entrepreneur. And today he runs two businesses that collectively do almost 30 million in annual recurring revenue, completely bootstrapped and with a tiny team. Now, Adam also has 150,000 followers on LinkedIn, and Daniel and I were lucky enough to interview him recently on the pod. Now, the episode is already live, so go check it out if you haven't already. But today we want to break down the story behind how we even landed a $30 million entrepreneur on the pod, how we convinced him to get on with us for an hour-long conversation, and what we actually learned from talking directly with him. So, Daniel, do you want to kick us off with talking about how we even got in touch with Adam in the first place? Because he's a guy that hundreds of people are reaching out to every day. And I think it's a pretty interesting story for the audience because it involved posting content on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. And Adam, if you're watching this, thank you again for coming on the show. We got Adam on through a fan of the show. Through Matt and I posting on LinkedIn, I got a DM one random Saturday. And I'll literally read it to you right here. Happy Saturday, man. Question. Have you chatted with Adam Robinson? Want him on your show? That literally turned into an email, which turned into a call, which turned into this shirt. Shout out Michael Kirsten. Thank you very much. Actually, not even one shirt, two shirts. All from just posting on LinkedIn and building this relationship with Michael that led to having Adam on the show. So to recap here, it was a LinkedIn DM that brought Adam on the show for us. And this was a huge light bulb moment for us because most of our guests beforehand have just said, Matt, you and I reaching out to the guest directly, and it's worked really well. Like we've gotten people like Oswald the Motor in, NBA players like Spencer Jones, $100 million entrepreneurs like Eric Way. But I think that's part of what makes this story of getting Adam on the show so exciting and can show the audience the power of posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah, 100%. I think, look, when you're running a podcast, doing a lot of outreach is just going to be part of the equation. But you can't forget that there are other really powerful sources and ways to drive traffic to your pod and to get really cool guests on. So, for example, things like referrals from existing audience members. You never know who's watching the pod, and chances are their network may include someone that you actually want to get on as a guest. And in this case, Adam Robinson had been someone that we really wanted to get on the pod for a long time. I remember very early on, months ago, starting Connection Accepted, I told a friend that we were starting a podcast where we would interview people who were on LinkedIn, building real businesses. And my friend said to me, you've got to get this guy, Adam Robinson, on. In the B2B space, he is an OG. You've got to get him on. He posts all the time on LinkedIn. He's super successful and would be a dream guest to have on. This was like 3-4 months ago. Daniel, I don't even know if I told you this, but one of my friends told me to get this guy on. And then one day I get a text from Daniel saying, hey, one of the fans actually is going to put us in touch with Adam, and he's happy to come on the pod. I was like, what? How did this even happen? But it happened because we've been posting so much on LinkedIn. It's been over 6 months at this point where Daniel and I pretty much every week post about Connection Accepted. So the word is out there and we have a real audience. And the cool thing is that the audience sometimes results in us getting guests that we otherwise probably would not have gotten in touch with. Case in point, Adam. Daniel, anything to add there? Otherwise, I also want to touch on what happened leading up to the conversation.
No, let's dive into that story.
All right, let's do it. So leading into the conversation, we had it booked probably 2 or 3 weeks in advance already, and it was scheduled for a Friday. And typically, Daniel and I both want to be on these conversations. We find that the podcasts usually go really well when we have the two of us both taking turns asking the guest ideas. There's never a lull in the conversation because there's more people, and we're able to collectively just ask more interesting questions and really put our heads together. But for whatever reason, uh, unfortunately, Daniel couldn't make it that day because you were tied up with work. And I remember thinking, all right, I've done a solo episode before. I've actually done it a few times before. And Daniel, you've done it as well. Occasionally, for example, in the past, I had interviewed Aswath Damodaran solo, who's another really big guest that we got on. So I was thinking to myself, all right, this can't be too bad, right? But then it really started to set in the day before and the day of, and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I can't mess this up. I've got to get this interview right. I need to make sure that I'm asking good questions to Adam that are actually applicable to his experience and his background. So, first thing I did was made sure to spend some time doing some research and really understanding who he is. And from that research, including going through his LinkedIn profile, found out that he's had a really long career before being a tech entrepreneur. There's actually his whole life before that when he was working on Wall Street at Lehman Brothers trading credit default swaps, which is completely different than what he does today, running two software companies. And so that became a really interesting point that I wanted to dig into. Also, there was a topic of communication, which Daniel and I have been really interested in lately, because we've realized that a lot of the guests that we get on this podcast are really great communicators. Posting on social media is simply a form of communication, just through a different medium than IRL, right? Instead of talking to someone across the board meeting table, you're talking to them through LinkedIn or through Instagram or through YouTube. And so the best communicators understand this, and Adam is no different. So I wanted to dig into that. So that's what went into the preparation, really deeply understanding his background and then thinking through some thoughtful questions. And something that was also really top of mind for me, Daniel, as we look to improve the conversations that we have as guests and to really differentiate Connection Accepted from just your average podcast, is how can we dig deeper than just the surface layer? How can we not just run down a list of 20 questions with the guest, but really spend extra time on a specific set of questions that our audience is really interested about? And how do we unpeel the layers of the onion with that guest so that we really get to some new insights that ordinarily don't get talked about? So that was also back of mind and top of mind for me going into that conversation with Adam. So, Friday comes, which is when we were filming with him, game day. And I want to also touch on what that conversation with Adam was actually like. I go into the Riverside meeting room about 5 minutes early. I'm a little bit nervous. I've got my Riverside tab pulled up on Chrome, but also my notes with some of the questions that I want to ask him pulled up on the other side. And I'm like thinking to myself, okay, let's freaking do this. Like, let's get excited because this guy is probably going to have some really great insights. And honestly, my expectations were more than met. And I don't say this lightly because we have talked to a lot of guests on this podcast, but Adam was definitely one of the most inspiring people that I've ever talked to on Connection Accepted, full stop. He had such a cool story and he was so down to earth and just matter of fact about his answers. You can really tell that he's walked the walk and really lived through everything that he's talked about. So I really found his insights on both communication but also content creation to be really insightful. And then his broader career philosophy and some of the learnings from his long and winding career through finance and into tech was also really exciting and interesting. It's just cool to see that there's someone who has done that before and is just a lot further along. And yeah, as someone who's running Forge right now, my marketing agency, but very early in the journey, it's cool to see how far someone can get when they just stick with something for you know a really long time. I think Adam's exact quote was, "Never underestimate the progress that you can make from 10 to 15 years of unrelenting persistence." So Really cool conversation. Daniel, want to open the floor up to you, though, in case you had any takeaways from the stories or the lessons that Adam shared with us that you want to share with the audience.
This episode is probably it might be our most popular one to date. I mean, not necessarily by views, but the amount of messages in DMs you and I have got, Matt, from this episode has been off the charts. I've got work friends, regular friends, family members. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this episode is so good." And to give the audience more context on this episode too, and what you were going through, Matt, like you've never met Adam Robinson before. You've read all of his content, pretty much watched a bunch of his YouTube videos. But when you log on to that Riverside, you're literally meeting someone for the first time, trying to build rapport in 5 minutes, maybe 10, or really probably only five because you only have an hour to record and you want to make the episode, as good as possible, have as much material to then cut. I mean, how you did it is so impressive, and also I think can give the audience like some context of like what we're going through. Like it's
Mm.
tough to meet someone for the first time and then like record a podcast and do it all in an hour. But that also shows how good of a communicator Adam is, how comfortable he is on camera. And same goes with you, Matt.
I appreciate it, man. I think that one thing that is really helpful is before every conversation, before we hit record, Daniel and I usually spend 5 to 10 minutes just talking with the guest. We want to build some comfort and rapport with the guest. We also want to understand and give a feel for what their energy is like. And if you just jump into the conversation and immediately start trying to record, chances are it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable for both you and the guest. And so, something that's helped immensely at the beginning of these conversations, which people don't see because we don't hit record, is the initial conversation that we have with them, where we give them a sense of what to expect with the conversation. So we say something like, okay, typically this is the format. We're going to start talking about your background, and then we're going to transition into communication and content and how that relates to building a business. We give them a mental roadmap of what to expect so that they aren't thinking, oh my gosh, what are these guys going to ask me about? Are they going to throw some crazy curveballs at me? Like, no, we want to address those concerns. And also we just want to have a little bit of small talk, just understand who they are as people, give them the opportunity to ask us any questions as well, which is super, super important as an interviewer. And then only then do we dive into it. And we always tell them this. I always say at the beginning of every conversation, yeah, we like to keep it pretty casual. And remember that anything that you talk about, you're looking at your editors right now. So you can always cut something out, we can always remove it. So please do not worry about saying the wrong thing. And I think even something as small as that makes a big difference.
I love that line. Every time you say it, Matt, at the beginning, I'm like, yep, awesome.
Yeah. I would say just final takeaways from the conversation on my end, Daniel, and then I'll let you also wrap things up for us here. But I was inspired by Adam in the conversation, not just because of his accomplishments and the businesses that he's built or the career that he's had, but really he comes to he comes across to me as someone who for a while was following the traditional path, and for a pretty long time too. I think almost a decade on Wall Street as a trader. Most people at that stage of life, you're like 30 something. This is all you've known. Your family, your friends, they all know you as Adam's the guy who works at Lehman trading credit default swaps. And you make a good amount of money. People respect you. It's a pretty easy path to just continue going down. He told me he actually lasted there for a very long time, which tells me that he was really good at his job as well. Nowadays, if you go on Wall Street, within a couple of years, it's pretty clear whether or not you're going to last. And it's becoming rarer and rarer to see people that stick it out for so long, but then all of a sudden, 10 years down the line, decide to make a completely different career pivot. And for Adam, that definitely must have been a very challenging time, but I respect him 1,000% for doing that because, as you and I know, Daniel, going off the traditional path isn't easy, especially when everyone around you wants you to continue down the banking, the consulting, the big tech job. Like everyone wants you to do it. And not because they don't want the best for you, but because that's just what society sees as a success. And if that is the career that's interesting to you, then all power to you. But I think in Adam's case, he saw his friends and roommates who were building technology businesses. I mean, he was fortunate in this fact that one of his roommates was the founder of Vimeo, the video platform. And he saw that these other guys were going out and building interesting businesses in the tech space, and that compelled him to also want to go out and do that. He said to me, and I remember his quote because I was rewatching the episode yesterday on my train back from Boston. He said, it just felt like those guys were getting a little bit more out of their life than I was trading credit default swaps. So that tells me he reflected on it and he took action based on how he felt.
That, Matt, was my main takeaway as well, because today, a lot of our identity is tied up in a lot of what we've done for the past year, whether it's our job, whether it's where we go to school, whether it's what hobbies we do, whether it's the place we work out, whether it's where we go to eat. There are all these things that kind of make up your identity, and work is such one core thing that like makes up a lot of who you are and also who you hang out with, especially when you're in these jobs like Wall Street or investment banking, where pretty much your work is also your social life. And to hear that Adam worked hard enough, not really to get out of it. I don't think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, not that he's escaping anything, but that you can reinvent yourself really at any point. Like, up until, I mean, after he graduated from Rice, he had just been on Wall Street the whole time. Like you said, that was who most of his friends were. Now, he did have some roommates, but like, that was most of his life. And to do a total 180, that takes a lot of guts and is really inspiring and should inspire anyone watching this that they can do the same thing regardless of if they're 20, about to graduate college and want to do something different than what they majored in, or if they're 50 and have been doing the same job for 20 years and have had this passion of making content on LinkedIn and want to do that full time. So that's what really inspired me from Adam's story. And it was even more inspiring because of how successful he's been doing it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Adam's an awesome entrepreneur, but also just he's really I think he's figured out a number of things that take many people a very long time, if not like a lifetime to figure out. There's the tactical things and there's the more high level philosophical things. Like tactically, he's really unlocked content on LinkedIn and he understands what good content requires. He invests in a really expensive content coach just so that he can be world class at content. And he told me, if LinkedIn is clearly the channel where you receive most of your customers, then why would you not want to be world class at it? You should be spending every waking second trying to be as good as you possibly can at LinkedIn if it is your business's number one marketing channel. If not, then it's fine. Just post like once a day and then spend time elsewhere. But to me, that also demonstrates the level of dedication that he has to his craft and how he really recognizes what is important to focus on. Investing in your own skill set, investing in your ability to communicate, on the platform that matters the most to your business, that's probably one of the highest leverage things that any founder can do. Identifying the things that they should actually be focusing on, the skills that actually move the needle for them.
The communication aspect of that episode was also fascinating to me, and I'm really excited about where season 2 is going, just talking more about communication because Adam had developed a lot as a communicator after his job on Wall Street, starting his own thing, because he's realized that talking to employees, it's much different than talking to an audience online, which is also different than talking to people that he's in a way contracting or hiring like his ghostwriter. And at the start, he kind of just thought that people didn't get it. But in reality, Adam wasn't being clear enough and needed to work on his communication. It was pretty powerful for me to see how vulnerable he was in talking about that because communication and especially leadership is something that people almost like act like they're born with it and are pretty self-conscious about it. Like they're like, "Oh, like, yeah, of course I know how to lead." But in reality, it's something you need to practice like anything else and consult outside opinions to help you get better because especially when you're in a position of power over someone you're, employing for work, it's a pretty difficult spot for them to tell you that you're not communicating something effectively and not being clear in a way that you can improve communicating to them. And I know I just said the word communicating like 5 times, but I hope that made sense that like it's really helpful to practice things and get outside opinions that I didn't really think of, especially in a work setting when there's some clear power dynamics and people for whatever reason think that they're great communicators and don't need to practice. I think that's also one of the societal norms that we could go on and on forever and that Chris Walker, I think, talked about, which that episode will be out by the time this one is airing. But just like, who says that it should be awkward to talk about communication or who says we should work 40 hours a week and not 43? But I'll let you talk a little bit more about the communication aspect too, Matt, because I was just fascinated by that and appreciated how vulnerable Adam was.
Yeah, my main takeaway here is that two things. One is that there's a thing known as management communication, which is how you talk to your team. And then there's the communication that founders typically provide externally. So when you're talking to customers or when you're talking online to your audience, how do you communicate there? And there are slight nuances between each, but it was really interesting on the first part, which is management communication, that being a good communicator can be the difference between whether or not your team is operating at A player levels or you thinking that your team just sucks. Because a lot of times people hire someone that they expect to be an A player and then they don't give clear instructions or they don't give clear context or they don't communicate what they want. And that person goes off and does something and then comes back. And then the founder, the CEO is saying, this is not what I wanted. Like, what's going on? And they blame the employee. But the reality is that the founder or whoever was issuing the request didn't actually communicate it clearly in the first place. And I've experienced this firsthand, having worked at places like BCG and even at Google. The difference between a manager that communicates to you in a very clear way, that gives you a very clear idea of what you need to do, versus one that gives you a very vague request and then expects you to almost interpret what they're thinking is night and day and can make or break the entire experience. Daniel, I'm sure you can relate to this as well. But that was key takeaway number one. Management communication matters. The difference between a good and a bad manager is how well they communicate to their team. Takeaway number two, which is related to more of the external communication, is that when you're writing on LinkedIn, when you're writing on a social media platform, you need to assume that no one cares. No one cares about your podcast. No one cares about what you're posting about. Don't assume that everyone already knows what you're about. You need to make every hook just as strong as the last one because people are looking through their feed for 5 minutes while they're scrolling on the toilet. LinkedIn has to choose whether it's gonna show them your post or 1,000 of other people's posts that all happen to get posted around the same time. And so takeaway here is you need to really think hard about how do I make this immediately relevant or interesting to my audience? And I'm not saying that we've figured this out. It's still something that I continue to this day to always try to improve on. And I don't feel satisfied with my own hooks a lot of the time on LinkedIn. And when I post YouTube videos on my own personal channel, I also am constantly dissatisfied with, okay, was that title really as good as it could have been? Or how could I have made the thumbnail text actually more interesting for someone to click on? And the number one unlock, though, is like all the tactics aside, just assume that your audience does not care. You have to give them a reason to care. You have to make it clear to them why they should spend their most valuable resource on earth, which is their time and attention, why they should give it to you as opposed to thousands of other creators. I will stop there, but this was an awesome episode. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. You're going to learn so much. For anyone who's building anything, it's worth every minute. And if you have any other questions or things that you want to see us do or ask in future episodes, make sure that you drop it in the comments so we can take your feedback and incorporate it. We're just getting started.
Thanks for watching or listening.